They're calling it a QB battle. But what if that's not what's actually happening at all? What if the Shedeur Sanders versus Deshaun Watson storyline everyone's talking about isn't real competition, but a manufactured controversy, built by the media to sell a narrative that doesn't exist inside the locker room? Because while fans are busy picking sides and debating a beef that supposedly hasn't even formed yet, Unc and Ocho are saying the truth is way more uncomfortable. There is no war, no tension, no drama, just football being turned into entertainment for clicks. And the craziest part? We might all be getting played by the story before the season even starts.
Now to football, the Cleveland Browns selected Arkansas quarterback Taylon Green in the sixth round, number 182. They became the first team in 15 years to take 3 signal callers in a two-draft span. Green joins the quarterback room currently holding Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, and Dylan Gabriel. The 6'5", 227-pound Green had a record-breaking performance at the Combine. He ran 4.36, the fastest by a quarterback since 2003.
Welcome back to HuddleHype, where we break down the biggest stories in the National Football League, and today things just got real. Because what looked like a simple quarterback conversation has turned into something way bigger. A full-blown media narrative. And Unc and Ocho? Yeah. They're not buying it at all. In fact, they're calling it out straight up. This whole Shedeur Sanders versus Deshaun Watson beef, according to them, it's being manufactured. And once you really listen to what they're saying, it starts to make a lot of sense. See, this all started after the Cleveland Browns made a move that raised some eyebrows, bringing in another quarterback, adding more competition to a room that already includes Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, and others. Now on paper, that sounds like a normal NFL move. Teams bring in talent every year. That's how the league works. But the media? They didn't treat it like a normal move. They turned it into a storyline. They turned it into drama. They turned it into who's QB1, and more importantly, is there tension brewing? And that's exactly where Unc and Ocho stepped in and said, hold up, we've seen this before. Because from a player's perspective, this isn't new. Every single year, teams bring in competition. Every single year, someone's job is on the line. That's football. That's the business. But what the media does is take that reality and twist it into something bigger, something emotional, something that fans can debate, argue about, and keep clicking on. And let's be honest, that's what drives attention today. It's not always the game itself, it's the story around it. And that's exactly what they're exposing. Because think about it. Why are we already talking about a battle when it's barely even minicamp? Why are questions already being framed like there's tension between Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson? The season hasn't started. Training camp hasn't even fully played out.
Now to football, the Cleveland Browns selected Arkansas quarterback Taylon Green in the sixth round, number 182. They became the first team in 15 years to take 3 signal callers in a two-draft span. Green joins the quarterback room currently holding Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, and Dylan Gabriel. The 6'5", 227-pound Green had a record-breaking performance at the Combine. He ran 4.36, the fastest by a quarterback since 2003. He also posted.
But the narrative? It's already running wild. And that's what frustrated not just Unc and Ocho, but even the Browns coaching staff. You saw it in that moment when the coach was clearly annoyed, like, we just finished the draft. And instead of talking about the new additions, the system, the team, you're already trying to push a quarterback controversy? That reaction said everything. Because it showed that even inside the building, they know what's happening. They know the media is trying to steer the conversation in a certain direction. And here's the thing. This isn't random. This is calculated because quarterback drama sells. Quarterback controversy gets clicks. And when you have names like Shedeur Sanders, young, hyped, high expectations, and Deshaun Watson, established, highly paid under pressure, that's the perfect storm for a storyline. But according to Unc and Ocho, the reality is much simpler. Deshaun Watson is the starter. Why? Because in the NFL, money talks. You don't pay a quarterback that kind of money to sit on the bench. It's just not how the league operates. Now, could things change later in the season? Sure. If performance drops, if the team struggles, then conversations happen. But right now, there is no real beef. There is no real battle. What there is competition. And competition is normal. But the media doesn't frame it as normal. They frame it as conflict. And that's where things start to get dangerous. Because once that narrative is out there, it doesn't go away. Every press conference becomes about it. Every bad throw becomes a headline. Every good play from the backup becomes a statement. And suddenly, players aren't just competing. They're being compared, judged, and put against each other in a way that can create tension that wasn't even there to begin with. That's the real issue. And that's what Unc and Ocho are warning about. They've been on both sides of this.
And Deshaun Watson right after the NFL draft. Let's take a listen to what Mr. Monken had to say.
This is mini camp, just the first one, obviously. So can you kind of share how did Deshaun and Shedeur and Dylan look in camp? Now you got all-
We just couldn't get past the draft and get right on to back to the quarterback. Anybody got some Miles questions too while we're at it? I mean, hell, while we're just here at night. First off, I'll address the question. First of all, it was awesome. 3 days. The weather was unbelievable to get out on the grass and pump them.
They know how quickly the media can flip words, take quotes out of context, and build a story that takes on a life of its own. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to control. Because fans start picking sides, debates start trending. And now, instead of focusing on football, the focus shifts to drama. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They also broke down the reality of the quarterback room itself. Because carrying multiple quarterbacks isn't just about talent, it's about roster value. In today's NFL, every spot matters. You need players who can contribute in multiple ways. Special teams, different positions, versatility. A quarterback, he plays one role. So if you're keeping multiple QBs, there has to be a reason. Development, potential, future planning, not drama, not controversy. And when they talked about the new guy coming in, the one with insane athletic numbers, they made it clear. Metrics are nice, but film is everything. You can run fast, jump high, impress at the combine, but if it doesn't translate on the field, it doesn't matter. And that ties back into the bigger conversation. Because just like players get overhyped based on measurables, narratives get overhyped based on speculation. And that's exactly what's happening here. The media is taking a situation that should be about development, competition, and long-term planning, and turning it into a short-term headline. But the players? They're not thinking about headlines. They're thinking about survival. Because in the NFL, nothing is guaranteed. You can be here today and gone tomorrow. So every snap, every practice, every opportunity matters. And that's the mindset Unc and Ocho kept coming back to. Compete. That's it. Don't worry about the noise. Don't worry about the narratives. Just compete. Because at the end of the day, performance decides everything. Not headlines, not tweets, not media debates. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. The difference between what's real and what's being pushed. Because while fans are being fed this idea of a brewing rivalry, inside the locker room, it's business as usual. Guys are working, learning, competing, trying to get better. But outside, it's a completely different story. And that gap between reality and narrative, that's where all the confusion comes from. So when Unc and Ocho say the media is stirring things up, they're not just guessing. They're speaking from experience. They've seen how these stories are built, how they spread, and how they can impact players and teams. And now they're calling it out in real time. So the next time you see a headline about Shedeur Sanders versus Deshaun Watson, ask yourself, is this actually happening? Or is it being created? Because in today's sports world, not everything you see is what it seems. And that's exactly why channels like HuddleHype exist, to cut through the noise and give you the real perspective. If you rock with content like this, make sure you stay locked in, because we're just getting started. Now, picking up right where that conversation leaves off, because the deeper you go into this situation, the more it becomes clear that this isn't even really about names like Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson at its core. It's about how modern NFL storytelling works, and how quickly perception can start shaping reality before a single meaningful snap is even played. And Unc and Ocho didn't just stop at calling out the media angle. They started breaking down what this kind of noise actually does inside an organization, even when everyone pretends it's just outside talk. Because here's the thing. Most fans don't see Even if players say they don't pay attention to headlines, they absolutely feel the environment those headlines create. It shows up in questions at press conferences. It shows up in how reporters frame every answer. It shows up in how social media clips get chopped and spread with captions that sometimes have nothing to do with what was actually said. And suddenly, a normal quarterback room, one that should be focused on installs, reps, timing, chemistry, is now constantly forced to answer questions about tension that may not even exist in the first place. And that's where Unc and Ocho really leaned into their point, because they kept emphasizing something simple that gets ignored in all of this. Quarterbacks don't live in headlines. They live in installs, film sessions, and practice reps. That's the real battlefield, not Twitter debates, not TV segments, not fan polls. The real evaluation happens when the lights are off and coaches are watching every single detail. Footwork, reads, timing, decision-making under pressure. So, when people try to frame it like there's some kind of emotional war happening between a veteran and a rookie, it ignores how structured everything actually is. The starter gets first-team reps because that's how systems are built. The backup develops because that's how depth is created. And the third guy, if there is one, usually has a very specific developmental or situational role. It's not chaos, it's hierarchy, it's repetition, it's process. But of course, process doesn't go viral. Chaos does. And that's why the conversation around this Browns quarterback room keeps getting pushed into something bigger than it is. Because the moment you attach names, expectations, and draft hype to a position as important as quarterback, everything becomes magnified. One incomplete pass becomes concern. One good throw becomes momentum shift. One practice rep becomes QB battle update. And Unc and Ocho made it very clear. They've seen how this movie goes before, and it usually doesn't end the way the media initially writes it. They also started digging into something even more uncomfortable, which is how much of this narrative isn't even about the players at all. It's about the business of attention. Because in today's sports media landscape, engagement is the currency. And quarterback controversy is one of the most reliable engines for engagement that exists. It doesn't matter if the situation is real or exaggerated. Once the label gets attached, it starts feeding itself. Every new clip, every quote, every practice update gets filtered through that same lens. And that's where things can quietly become unfair to the players involved. Because now, a young quarterback isn't just trying to learn an NFL system. He's also being compared to a franchise veteran with a massive contract and years of experience. Every moment becomes a comparison point instead of a development step. And for the veteran, every mistake becomes amplified because the backup is always waiting in the wings in the public imagination, even if that's not how the coaching staff actually views it. Unc and Ocho pointed out that this is exactly how unnecessary pressure gets created. Not from inside the building, but from outside assumptions being repeated enough times that people start treating them like facts. And once that happens, it becomes very hard to walk it back, even if the organization itself never endorsed the storyline. Then the conversation shifted into something even more grounded. What actually determines quarterback success in a situation? Like this. And they made it simple. Consistency, command of the offense, and trust from coaches. Not social media momentum, not public opinion, not highlight clips. Consistency and execution is what keeps a quarterback on the field in the NFL. And inconsistency is what opens the door for change. Everything else is secondary. They also highlighted something that often gets overlooked when fans talk about potential players, the difference between tools and production. Athletic ability, arm strength, speed, and measurables will always create excitement, especially for newer names entering the league. But at the NFL level, those traits are only valuable when they translate into sustained, repeatable results under real defensive pressure. Otherwise, they remain projections, not proof, and that ties directly back into the broader theme they were hammering home. A lot of what the public gets sold is projection-based storytelling. Who could win the job? Who might take over? Who looks like they're trending upward? But inside the building, decisions are rarely made on projection alone. They're made on trust built over time, in real situations, against real defenses, with real consequences. So when people online start turning every practice rep into a QB controversy update, It creates a version of reality that doesn't necessarily match what coaches are actually evaluating. And maybe the most important point they circled back to was this idea of patience, something that doesn't really exist in the modern sports cycle anymore. Fans want answers immediately. Media wants storylines immediately. Social platforms reward instant takes, not long-term development arcs. But quarterback development, especially for younger players stepping into the league, does not operate on instant timelines. It's gradual, it's repetitive, it's often invisible before it becomes visible. That's why Unc Ocho kept pushing the same message in different ways. Ignore the noise, respect the process, and understand that what's being sold as a battle is often just standard NFL structure being dressed up as drama. And as this situation continues to unfold, that's where the real separation will happen. Not between quarterbacks and a headline, but between perception and performance on the field. Because eventually, training camp will lead to preseason. Preseason will lead to roster decisions. And roster decisions will be made based on what coaches actually see every day, not what narratives were trending weeks earlier. So when all is said and done, this entire beef conversation might end up looking less like a real conflict, and more like another example of how quickly the NFL world can turn normal competition into a manufactured storyline. And that's exactly why this conversation isn't going away anytime soon, because as long as there's attention to be gained, there will always be someone trying to frame competition as controversy. But inside the building where it actually matters, the focus stays the same. Learn the system, win the job, and be ready when your number is called. Everything else? That's just noise around the game.